Arizona, homeowner's best friend.
Welcome, y'all. And as we have done traditionally over the last few years during the holiday season, they put Rosie in charge of topic research. And I'm very grateful for that, very appreciative of that. And last week, many of y'all joined us for a lesson on the USS Arizona with Dr. David Dean, Associate Professor of History at Grand Canyon University, who had actually joined us from his new homestead in Mount Vernon, Kentucky. Well, this week we too are going to venture just a little bit outside the normal drywall repair, air conditioning questions, insulation dilemmas of Rosie on the House, and we're going to venture into the history chapters of the founding of the great state of Arizona. And to do that, we've invited two very special guests, Mr. Steve Schumacher, the official designated historian of the city of Phoenix. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning to you, Rosie. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it.
You are the first ever official designated Phoenix historian.
Mayor Gallego likes to use the word inaugural. Yes.
Okay, all right. You're the inaugural. So that is to say, that assumes now we will always have one.
Oh, it does, right? Doesn't it?
Yes,
right. Yes, because there will be a day where, yes, I won't be inaugural any longer. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And we are joined by architect Don Ryden, who many of you who are listeners of the show have heard Don on the show many times. In 37 years of broadcasting, some of the favorite shows I've ever done date back about 15 years ago. And Don, I think it was about a 6-part series we did on the history of the types of homes in Phoenix.
It was indeed. It's a pleasure to be back and carry on with the never-ending story of Arizona, Phoenix, and a comfortable home.
So those of you that are infatuated with history as me, and even if you're not, you're going to find this a great hour. Picture yourself approximately, maybe let's go back 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and you're barefoot and nearly naked, and you're walking across the Sonoran Desert, and you come across the Salt River, and you try and decide, this is where I'm going to stay the night. How do you decide? In your stretch of the Salt River, you could go upriver to where it's joined by the Verde. You could go downriver to Tres Rios, and where it's joined by 2 other rivers. But you pick a spot, which is basically now Washington and Central, just south of there, and you say, this is where I want to camp. Steve, what was it about the bend in the river right there? You're walking across these creosote, cholla-infested flats. You get to this riparian wet area, and you get to the banks of the... What is it about that spot that family decided, we're going to build a city here that in the future is going to have 3 million people?
Wow. Wow, what a great question. I think, at least in terms of the early... setting the Hohokam / Hohokam folks aside for a second, but the Anglo pioneers, they were essentially capitalists, and they saw the opportunity from an agricultural standpoint, the fertile grounds. You mentioned Tres Rios, seeing beavers and deer running around, all kinds of things. They saw the opportunity to grow a lot of crops, sell them, and make a lot of money. Some of the earliest Anglo pioneers were basically capitalists, and that's what they saw. But it does shock me. It's like you got to stay close to the river. I mean, water has always been an issue way back to day one.
I've walked the trail many, many times, and I know for a fact that if that person had been me 2,000 years ago, we'd be at the convergence of the Salt and the Verde.
Ah, right.
Huh? Right, Don?
I suppose so, but it's pretty rocky and canyon-like up in that country.
But at that
here-
point, I'm only settling for one family.
Oh, well, yeah. So when the rest of your cousins come in from Louisiana 2,000 years ago, then you're going to look at this spot and figure with the bend in the river and the fact that the alluvial soils are so rich, you would see that this is an opportunity to put in canals and run ditches to these flatlands to do your farming. So what we found out is the Hohokam people were like, they ended up with a system of government and religion and prosperity agriculture that would I suppose, be greater than any other irrigation system of an Indian tribe in North America.
I mean, the original canal builders actually figured out how to move water uphill without the CAP. Talk to us about those original canals. I mean, there were how many miles of canals? How big that were completely and totally hand dug?
Hand dug just by little spoon-like tools. That's really all they had. They didn't even, have the equipment that the Anglos had later on. But yeah, 1,000 miles of canals stretching all along the Salt River, going north and south and east and west.
Now, folks, I want you to stop and think about this. 1,000 miles of canals built by hand. If you traveled 1,000 miles east on Interstate 10, you would get to Houston. Or just about. That's a lot of hand-dug canals. How many people did it take to do that?
Well, at any given time, there was a community of several thousand spread throughout the valley of the Hohokam folks. So, they didn't have the internet or television or anything else, so they pretty much spent a lot of their time working. They did have ball courts for recreation, but digging the canals was pretty much a full-time occupation for a couple thousand people.
And you go to the museum that kind of brings your attention to that. I'm not going to be able to pronounce the new name. I still consider it the Pueblo Grande, but the new name,
Sudafaki.
Okay. It actually documents the fact that there could possibly have been as many as 200,000 people populating this riparian valley. I mean, Flagstaff is only 70,000 people. That's 3 Flagstaffs. And the question I've got to ask, I know where they got their fresh water. What did they do for sanitation?
They went down to the end of the river.
You had to walk to Buckeye to relieve yourself?
Yeah, you take care of the next village downstream.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. Hadn't really considered the sanitary part of the beginnings, but yeah, that's a reality.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Well, you go down to the museum at 45th Street and Van Buren Washington, and you can see replications of their homes, which were pit houses. They lived in dugouts with thatched tops and covered with mud.
How deep did they have to dig those?
About
Don?
2 feet.
Okay.
Just down 2 feet, and then stuck 4 poles in the middle of the big oval hole, which was about maybe the biggest would have been 20 feet by 10 or 12.
Okay.
And then they would build a framework of mesquite logs and then cover it with branches, put on top of that leaves, and then they would plaster it with 4 or 5 inches of mud and put a hole in the middle of the flat roof, and that was where the smoke from their little fire went out.
And they didn't even have the Register of Contractors to issue a minimum workmanship standard or 2-year review of warranty work.
Well, that's why, according to my structural engineer, that the Hohokam civilization died because the building department would not let anyone build adobes higher than one story. And thus, Casa Grande would have been the last big 2-3-story building in Arizona by the Hohokam because of the bureaucracy of the building departments.
But there's a lot about those pit houses and the other orientations in the building materials they use that actually make the summer here back then survivable.
Survivable, not yet tolerable, but
Right.
survivable.
Yeah, and what was it about those homes? I mean, just going in 2 feet
Right.
into the soil
That helps.
stabilizes your temperature a bit.
That does stabilize the temperature and the thickness and the use of insulative natural materials. It was thermal mass that was one of the things that kept the pit houses tolerable for living. Now, remember, they lived indoors and outdoors all the time.
Yeah.
So they had a ramada. There were 3 structures in a household. So you had the pit house, you had an open ramada for doing your daily chores and work, and then you had a little circle of reeds with the campfire, and that was your kitchen. So it took those 3 parts for each household to make a home.
The estate.
The estate was the platform mound at the center of the village, and that was really an interesting structure because on top of it, imagine in today's terms, on top of it, that was the government. So you had a city hall, you had a church, and you had the SRP office there to run all the canals.
I bet
So
you
that's
did.
what the platform mounds were about.
Steve, you mentioned the ball courts. It's amazing to me when I read the placards and the information down at, Pueblo Grande Museum. It talks about how many the evidence of how many ball courts there were between Buckeye and Casa Grande.
Oh, yeah. Mesa, Casa Grande. Yeah, ball courts. That was just like us, where we have parks today and tennis courts and basketball courts. They needed their recreation as well. So that was a regular part of every community they put together.
We're here this morning at Rosie on the House talking, why is Phoenix located exactly where it is? What logic lent itself to settling here, and then the history of once the first pit house was built? How did you make room for everybody else? We're here with Don Ryden, historic architect right here, native Phoenician, and Steve Schumacher, the official historian of the city of Phoenix.
Rosie on the house, every Arizona homeowner's best friend.